Next, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our first new grammar point for Japanese 1020. But before we start, let's have a quick reminder of one of the most important concepts from Japanese 1010, the te form. As you might remember, te form doesn't quote-unquote mean something on its own. It's a connector that lets us put two words together. We use it to help us attach a bunch of different phrases to our verbs to add more to them. Making the te form is really easy for ru verbs. All we have to do is get rid of the ru at the end and replace it with te. So taberu, for example, just becomes tabete. Irregular verbs are the ones that we have to watch. That's why they're called irregular. In Japanese, the irregular verbs are suru and kuru, and their te forms are shite and kite. So those are the easy ones. With u verbs, it's a little more tricky because we have to look at the hiragana at the end of the verb. For u verbs that end in u, tsu, or ru, we make the te form by getting rid of the last syllable and putting te, that's with a small tsu. So, for example, the te form of au is atte. For matsu, it's matte. For kaeru, it's kaete. For the ones that end in mu, bu, nu, we have to get rid of the last syllable and put nde. So for example, the te form of yomu is yonde. The te form of asobu is asonde. And the te form of shinu is shinde. For ones that end with ku, we have to get rid of the ku and put in ite. So the te form of kaku is kaite. There's just one weird exception. Iku gets turned into ite. Gu works almost the same way as ku. We are going to change the gu to ide. So the te form of isogu becomes isoide. Finally, we have su. The last hiragana changes to shite, so hanasu becomes hanashite. It seems like a lot to remember, but the more we practice using the te form, the easier it will get to remember it. So let's get practicing. Last semester, we talked about a couple different ways to use te form, but today I'm going to introduce a brand new one. So we already know how to say a person is going to eat something. Tabemasu. We also know how to say they ate in the past. Tabemashita. But what about the time between those two? What about the time when they are eating? We show this using the te form plus the verb imasu. So the te form of taberu is tabete, and when we put imasu on the end, it becomes tabete imasu. I am eating right now. Tabete imasu. So let's take a look at the people in this room right now. This lady in the middle, what do we think she's doing? Nani o shite imasu ka? She's reading a book. So, hon o yomu. Hon o yonde imasu. How about this lady? Kohi o nomu. Kohi o nonde imasu. In other words, the te imasu form is used to describe what we are currently doing, to tell about an action that's happening right now. This can be in the specific sense or in the more general sense. So, for example, right now at 7:52 p.m. on August 21st, 2020, I am teaching Japanese. Nihongo o oshiete imasu. But I can use the same phrase to tell you what I'm doing in Denton, what I'm doing at UNT, what I'm doing with my life. 日本語を教えています。So let's take a look at a couple of examples. 皆さん、花子さんは何をしていますか？泳いでいます。So, 泳ぐ, the te form is 泳いで plus います。じゃあ、エリンさん。エリンさんは何をしていますか？太郎さんと話しています。Let's do a couple more. Feel free to pause the video to give yourself a chance to think of the answer. この人は何をしていますか？ホテルの人と話しています。何をしていますか？手紙を書いています。何をしていますか？絵を見ています。絵 are pictures or paintings. 何をしていますか？ビールを飲んでいます。何をしていますか？寝ています。何をしていますか？新聞を読んでいます。So now that we have this expression, we can talk about what a person is doing. The other thing to keep in mind is that this imas ending we learned is a verb. It's the same iru we learned in chapter 4. Since it's a verb, we can change it however we want, just like we can any other verb. So we can say, for example, 食べていません. If 食べません means someone won't or doesn't eat, what do you think 食べていません might be? That's right. They aren't eating right now. Maybe they ate before or they will eat later, but they aren't eating now. We can also say 食べていました to tell about the fact that someone was eating something before. So they were eating. Like, for example, if we wanted to say, I was eating, and then I got a phone call from a friend. Something like that. In the same way, we can say, 食べていませんでした to mean someone was not eating. Okay, so now we know the important points about the te imas form. Try and answer some of the practice questions below, and I'll be back with another video to tell you another way you can use this structure.